Hi everyone, welcome to this afternoon's session, which is called In My Life, Reflections on HRI at 25. So hi to all of you, my name is Catherine Cook and I lead the Sustainable Financing team at HRI. Before we start the session, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to Maddie and Lucy, Naomi and Suchitra, who've been working tirelessly to put on this unique event, Constellations. Personally, after 2 years of not seeing even the closest of colleagues, it's been really wonderful to feel part of something and to connect with the harm reduction community again, even if not face to face. I feel reinvigorated and, it's reminded me that I'm part of something big and something special and really, really important. And I heard yesterday, I think that we reached the 1,000 people registering, which is just phenomenal. So thank you to everyone that's registered and thank you to all those that have joined us over the past week or so. And don't forget to watch the videos if you've missed any sessions, which I'm sure you might have done. There's loads to catch up on. So today's session is all about the fact that HRI is 25 years old. And I'm really happy to be here talking about HRI with wonderful board members past and present to talk about their journeys with HRI or the International Harm Reduction Association as we were once known. We've got Pat O'Hare, we've got Bill Stronach, we've got Olusei Kahindi and Lucy Burns here today. And we'll hear from each of them about what led them to HRI and more. But before we do, I'd like to give you a little potted history of HRI to bring you all up to speed. We've got a 25th anniversary page on our website that's got quite a nice timeline of HRI over the years and put together by our comms officer, Suchitra. So please do take a look at that. And we can maybe put the link, thank you, Suchi, she's already put the link in the chat box for people. We're just going to pull up some of the photos, a kind of collage of photos of key moments that you can look at on the website, and you can kind of click through and look at them more closely there. But just to give you a kind of taster and a background to look at while I'm talking about the history. So HRI traces its origins to the first international conference on the reduction of drug-related harms, which was held in Liverpool in England in 1990. And I think we've even got a picture from that. It might not be showing up on the screen, but you can have a look at it on the website, and I think we've got Pat in there, Pat O'Hare in there on a panel at that first conference in Liverpool. And Liverpool was one of the first places to open needle exchanges, and it attracted hundreds of visitors each year wanting to learn about the Mersey harm reduction model. And this first conference was really successful, and it led to it becoming an annual event, and it went around the world into different cities, and it helped to spread the principles of harm reduction and to share knowledge, experience, build networks, bring people together, and really kind of invigorate work around harm reduction. And it became an important international meeting and networking point for drug user activists and organisations. Moving on to 1996, the International Harm Reduction Association, or IRA, was launched at the 7th International Conference. And initially, this was to enable networking and communication between those events, between the conferences, and to facilitate collective advocacy for health-based approaches to drug use and HIV. And over the next few years, the profile of the conference grew, along with an increasing acceptance of harm reduction policies and practices around the world. And in 2006, moving ahead again, the organisation expanded its activities beyond the annual conference and started to have a programme of work on public health, advocacy, research and human rights. And I joined in 2007, so that's where my memory kind of starts of the organisation. And that really, the way that happened was we had Jerry Stimpson as the executive director at the time, and Jamie Bridge, who you might know from the International Drug Policy Consortium. He was then with IRA. They put in a bid to the UK Department for International Development for this kind of organisational programme of work, and were successful. So that enabled the hiring of staff, and we began to kind of track harm reduction practices around the world. So we started the Global State of Harm Reduction project. We began looking at the level of funding for harm reduction in lower middle income countries in particular. And we began looking at human rights abuses experienced by people who use drugs, including tracking the death penalty for drug offences around the world. So we're now called Harm Reduction International, and we have conferences every 2 years, usually. And we've got a staff of 13 people. But I'd like to invite the sort of founder and the person who started it all off, Pat O'Hare, to kind of tell us where it all began. And for those of you who don't know Pat, he's not only HRI's founder, but he's also one of the founders of Harm Reduction itself. I can't kind of do justice to all the work that he's done in a short introduction. But just briefly, his work has helped governments change their approach to drug use and potential drug-related harms. He's published extensively on harm reduction, HIV prevention and drug policy, spoken at numerous international conferences. He founded the International Journal of Drug Policy, which I'm sure many of you have come across. Has received awards for his work in the field and is a visiting professor in drug use and addiction at Liverpool John Moores University. And after starting the organisation in '96, he was the executive director until he stepped down in 2004. But we were really lucky that Pat never really strayed that far away from HRI. He's been on the board and he's stayed involved with the organisation, with the conferences, and he's now an ex officio trustee. So Pat, we're really happy to have you here in this session and would love it if you could give us your kind of reflections on how it all started and kind of set the scene for us, please.
Thanks very much, Kat. Thank you for your very kind remarks. I will be delighted to do that, but please bear in mind that at my age, it's a long time ago. I'm not sure I can remember everything, but I'll try my best. It actually, I was working in Liverpool. I was the director of the Mersey Drug Training and Information Centre. And we were the training and information arm of the health authority as far as drugs is concerned. And across the courtyard was the Maryland Centre, which was one of the first places in the world to give out clean syringes. The Maryland Centre was where people could get prescribed, mostly methadone actually. Some people got heroin, but it was mostly methadone. And it's all the fault of a man called John Ashton. John Ashton was the regional director of health for the Mersey region. And he was also the co-author of a book with Howard Seymour called The New Public Health. And I tried to find The New Public Health in the house so that I could read it and tell you what it was all about, but I couldn't find it. But it was about an approach to health that enabled people to basically take control of their surroundings, their own personal health. And one day I was with John Ashton, and he said to me, you know what? Because no one else, apart from people in Rotterdam, as far as I remember, I think there was one place in Peterborough in England, no one was doing what we were doing. So John Ashton said to me, the fatal words, he said, Pat, you've got to take this thing around the world. And that's what I did, because I always do what I'm told. And I took it around the world. I went everywhere. I spoke to ministers. I spoke to all sorts of people. I remember one particular meeting with the head of the Office of Narcotics Control in Thailand, in Bangkok. And all he was interested in actually was that could I possibly pay for his travel and accommodation and registration for the next conference, which was going to be in Barcelona. So that was the kind of response I got from lots of people. But, you know, people gradually started to get this a little bit. They started to understand it. And John Ashton, when I was back in Liverpool once, and John Ashton came up with another idea which gave me a job. He said, you know what we need to do? We need to have a conference. So I said, oh, okay, John. And I must say, at that time, I didn't know what an abstract for a conference was. I didn't even know what it was. And so I said, okay. And so we organized the conference, and that was the first conference on harm reduction in Liverpool, which was attended by 420 people. And two of those people were my daughters, Maddie and Lucy. They were very, very young at the time. They actually came to the conference. And it was, it was a real success. And during the lunch break on the final day, the guy came in. I don't think Bill Stronach wasn't with him. A guy from Australia called Michael Moore, who was a politician, came in with a massive big pile of papers like this, which was a bid to hold a conference in Melbourne. Now, to be honest with you, up to then I didn't have a bid. And actually afterwards, I never had bids. I used to pick the place myself. I used to think, oh, we'll go here. But I used to pretend that it was a competitive thing. So if I went to Barcelona, I would tell them, oh yeah, there's parts of there are two other cities that are interested in this conference, and I would pretend it was like this. Well, it was actually I just wanted it to be in Barcelona. That was another successful conference. 450 people, I believe, came to that. I got a phone call one day from this guy. Said, "Oh, my name's Jean Colom." And he was to be the next mayor of Barcelona. And he said, "I believe you're going to do a conference about drugs in Barcelona." So I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, if you're going to do it, it better be good." He said, "So come and see me." So I went to Barcelona to see him. I just wondered what he was going to say to me. And he said to me, "Look," he said, "I'm going to give you 30,000 euros. I think it was euros at the time. "I'm going to give you 30,000 euros to do this conference, to make it good," which was absolutely amazing, because 30,000 basically took care of it, more or less, in those days. But it was a great conference. It was very, very, very important. Let me just digress onto where the International Harm Reduction Association, now known as HRI, came from.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not my idea. I was with a man called Ernie Drucker, who's a very important person, now unfortunately very, very ill with Alzheimer's. And we were, as you do, we were on a roof terrace in Cannes in the south of France. We'd just been to a conference in the south of France, because one of the things that happened was I kept getting invited to speak at conferences all over the show. I traveled all over the world speaking at conferences. So this time we were in the south of France, and Ernie said to me, he said, "You know what? We need a trade association." I said, "What do you mean, a trade association?" He said, "Well, an association that people join and they'll feel part of something between the conferences." He said, "And you're the man to do it." And so I did it. I just formed this thing called the International Harm Reduction Association, and people joined. They didn't have to pay anything. They just joined. And it just grew from there. It was mainly around the conference that there was not an awful lot went on that people would notice. A lot of it was me scrambling around trying to get people to host the conference. But we decided that it would be a membership thing. People wouldn't have to pay and they could just join. To be honest, I have no idea how many people joined. One of the things they got was they got a copy of a subscription to the International Journal of Drug Policy. And I think most people joined, to be honest with you, just for that. It was the conference that was just so important, because it energized people. People met people they didn't know. People met people they'd read about, all this kind of thing. It was a really, really important tool in spreading harm reduction around the world. where am I up to now? I don't even know what year I'm at the moment. But the conference really, it's an amazing event. Actually, you learn things, you meet people, you talk to people who you read about, and you have a great time. You really do have a great time.
Mm.
There was, at the last conference in Porto, one of the worst things that's ever happened to me in my life happened, actually. Two young women, drug users, came to me and said, "Can I take a photo of you? Can I take a photo with you?" So I said, "Of course." So they took the photo, the selfie, and not many hours later, one of them was dead. She overdosed.
Mm.
And it was an incredibly sad thing. Yeah. So where am I now?
I wonder, Pat,
Yeah.
if sorry, I've got a bit of an echo. I wondered if you could take us even further back, if that's possible, just to give us a sense of what led you to harm reduction and why it became something that you pursued. Am I right in thinking you were a teacher? I think I've heard you talk about this before, but a long time ago.
I was a teacher. I was a teacher of physical education, actually. So I was a teacher, and then I became what was called a drug coordinator for the local authority. And that's where I met all the people in Maryland Street at the Mersey Drug Training and Information Centre. I learned everything from them. I mean, some of the things that happened were just quite extraordinary. I'll tell you a funny story. Am I allowed to swear in this? Just
I think so. Yeah.
Quoting someone. I was in a pub in Liverpool with Howard Seymour, who was my direct boss. And it was one with a high bar and high stools. Howard was sitting there, I was sitting there, and there's a guy sitting there watching the television, which was up there and was on. So I'm talking to Howard and blah, blah, blah. And this guy elbows me, he says, "Hey," he said, "see that guy there pointing at the television with me on the screen?" It was an interview that I'd done during the day. He said, "See that guy there?" So I said, "Yeah." He said, "He talks fucking shite." So I just said, "Yeah, he does." He just didn't know that I was the guy that was on the screen. So yeah, when I used to go and give talks, in Liverpool, try and talk to people about it. And there was always someone in the audience. I could always see someone who was tapping their feet, because that's the guy that's going to attack me tonight. So I was giving this talk, and it was just shortly after the Chill Out episode. We produced a leaflet on ecstasy called Chill Out, which started, it's not a good idea to use ecstasy, however, if you do. And then there was a load of precautions. And then there was one sentence about, if you're going to have sex, make sure you use a condom. Okay? Well, the shit hit the fan. It just went absolutely crazy. I was on the front page of the Liverpool Echo in the evening. The next day, I was on the front page of the Daily Star. Daft do-gooder tells kids it's okay to kill a drug. That was me. And I was on the front page of The Sun, who referred to the one sentence about having sex and said, "Fury at Sex Guide to E." There was questions in Parliament. It was demanded that we got shut down. And Howard Seymour said, "We better go and see the head of the health authority," whose name actually escapes me at the moment. It'll come to me. We went over, and he said to Howard, "Is Pat on the line or over the line?" And Howard said, "He's on the line." So it was Sir Robert someone. Sir Robert said, Pat, go and defend that leaflet everywhere. So I did. I was on chat shows. It was in newspapers. It just was crazy, the furor about it. And eventually, the Liverpool Echo, which had started all this stuff by publishing this stupid headline, raving mad, they offered me a double page of the paper to write, which was quite daunting because it's a lot of words to fill in 2 pages. But I basically defended the leaflets. I said, what are you going to do? Are you going to do nothing and let people die because you didn't give them any information? You didn't give them correct information? I said, I have a duty. And I played the father that looks after my kids, you know. And the Echo then asked for letters about chill out. And there was a ratio of 13, every 4 letters against me, there were 13 letters for me.
Wow.
And the Liverpool Echo, basically, I saw the editor of the Liverpool Echo about 10 years later, and he said to me, it's the worst thing I ever did in my career as a journalist. But things changed, and I remember I was doing a talk one night, and there was a guy in the front row tapping his feet and fidgeting, and I thought, that's the guy that's going to attack me tonight. And at the end, I said, any questions, any comments? This guy said, yeah, I've got a comment. I said, okay. He said, I think what you're doing is fucking great. They're his exact words. And it changed, things changed actually, and quite a lot. And the people in Liverpool, the police, this is important. The police were completely on our side in this. In syringe and needle and syringe exchange, all the stuff. The police, because they realised, hang on, this is going to make our job easier. Peter Deary, who's the head of the drug squad, said, this is great because we don't have to arrest the same people all the time. The police cars weren't allowed to be anywhere near the place. The police were not allowed to stroll up and down. And the police, we actually gave the head of the drug squad, we let him speak at a conference in Australia instead of us. I mean, we told him more or less what to say. But he kept saying, our harm reduction policy, our harm reduction policy. This is the police. And this was in the early, towards the end of the 80s, start of the 90s. So the police, I mean, the police are pretty crucial, you know, in this. And we were very lucky. We were very lucky because we just basically explained to them what we were doing. And they liked it. So where am I up to now? Well, that's when John Ashton told me to go around the world, and I did a few times. And, you know, our legacy is the conference, the International General Drug Policy, and a lot of people who would have been dead are alive now because of what we all did. So I'm extremely proud of what we did. It wasn't my idea. I didn't invent it. I just did what my bosses asked me to do. And here we are now, this many years later, with an amazing organization called Harm Reduction International. And I'm very, very proud to be part of it and to have been part of it. And yeah, I'm proud of it all.
Pat, just amazing, just an amazing tale. And yeah, well, a lot to be thankful for, all the work that you've done. And even if the idea wasn't yours, you know, you drove that, you drove that kind of bus all around the world, and you know, you've got a huge number of people on that harm reduction bus and understanding it and fighting for it all around the world. So Yeah, amazing. That could go on for the whole hour, to be honest, but we need to bring other people into the conversation. So, Pat, I'll bring you back in a bit, and we'll move on to hear a bit from Bill Stronach. Bill was also there at the beginning of it all, and he was a founding director and a treasurer on our board. And Bill's been a driving force for harm reduction in Australia. He spent 18 years as the chief executive officer of the Australian Drug Foundation. He was a director of the International Consortium on Alcohol and Harm Reduction, has chaired the boards of ANNEX, which is the Association of Needle and Syringe Programs in Australia, and the boards of Harm Reduction Victoria. And in 2012, he co-founded the Centre for Law Enforcement and Public Health and has chaired the organising committees for 6 international LEAF, the Law Enforcement and Public Health conferences held to date. So, Bill, thanks so much for joining us today. And I'm completely in awe of you joining us at 1:30 in the morning, or 2:30 maybe it is now.
Yes.
Thanks so much for waking up and speaking with us today. I'd love it if you could tell us a bit about your journey with the International Harm Reduction Association, as it was then known.
Thanks, Kat. Perhaps if I could just preface it by, before my journey with IRA started, or with Pat, if you like, because that's where it all happened. Prior to that, when I joined the Australian Drug Foundation in the late 80s, it was a fairly innocuous information and education outfit, which struck me as paying my salary but not doing much. With due respect, it has changed since then. I remember in my first year, well within my first year, for some reason, the US ambassador to Australia paid a visit to the foundation, and he arrived in a cavalcade and came into our conference room, and in his hand he had a whole bunch of flyers which we had produced at the Australian Drug Foundation, drug information flyers, and they were stolen, unashamedly stolen from products that Pat's organisation had produced. So they had a bit of a tinge of harm reduction about them. And I noted that the ambassador, after saying all the right things, had them all highlighted. And he sort of threw them on the table in front of me, and he said, "We'll go through these one at a time." I said, I was never going to say who's running this show, but he said, "What do you mean by this? What's this? What's this? Are you condoning drugs? You're encouraging people." And then on to the next fly. And this went on for 10 or 15 minutes, and I was getting a little sweaty. Then we shook hands, and he said, "Look, you probably want to think about rewriting those flyers." And off he went into the wilderness, never to be seen again. That sort of prompted me to think there's something going on here that I really am not aware of, because I was new to the field. That was in the late 80s. Then in 1990, Pat organised, and I didn't know Pat at the time, organised the first Liverpool conference. And the foundation sent over one of its staff, Helen Fenny, Pat would know Helen, to that conference. And Helen came back singing the praises of a harm reduction approach to drugs, and also singing the praises of Pat. So subsequent to that, we went to the Barcelona conference. But I think just prior to that, we made a pitch, and Pat tells this story regularly, I'm surprised he didn't tonight, that we put in a bid to hold the conference in Melbourne, not knowing that Michael Moore, a politician from Canberra, had put in a bid to hold it in Canberra. We'd never run a conference before. We didn't have a clue what we were doing, but we put in a bid to run this international conference in 1992. And I believe Pat had to navigate through Michael Moore's bid and ours, and Pat came out to Melbourne and we hit it off. And subsequently, much to Michael's chagrin, we held the conference in Melbourne in 1992, and after that, 2 more in Australia. That was really my introduction to harm reduction, and being with Pat so much and communicating with him so much over that time, I got to learn exactly what he had achieved under very difficult circumstances. And it was really important, because at that time, with harm reduction bubbling away and a few proponents the likes of Alex Wodak and Nick Crofts and so forth, well-known names in Australia. It was hard work, and there were pretty vigorous and savage attacks on people leading like Alex and Nick, and I was trailing along singing the same song but not with quite the same status as those people. So bringing the harm reduction conference to Melbourne was potentially going to cause problems politically. It didn't really. In fact, I think, as Pat said, the police, when you talk to them, certainly unofficially, were supportive by and large. Unofficially, they often spoke out against it, but we knew what their thinking really was. We did it a little bit differently as an organisation. My board was very conservative, so I didn't really tell them what was going on, that we were shifting fairly significantly in the way we talked about drug use and drugs. And I didn't get all the invitations to travel the world like Pat did. But we decided particularly to focus strategically on two areas, one being the media, because there's that inverse relationship between media coverage and the usage of drugs, high media coverage on illicit drugs and low media coverage on the legal drugs. So we employed 3 journalists on staff, made them available 24 hours a day to the media, with the aim of trying to help the media understand the issues and often rewrite their stories while we talk to them on the phone to use the right language. And I think that was quite successful. Although I did at a conference in Washington refer to that strategy as being a bit subversive with the media, and that came back to haunt me in federal parliament for the rest of my days. I was quoted annually by some of the right-wing conservatives about being a subversive, but never mind. The other strategy was we thought it would be useful, and it proved useful, to engage high-profile conservatives in the community who would support and speak out or put into practice harm reduction thinking, if you like. And we engaged half a dozen principals of the elite church-based private schools in Melbourne and a number of other high-profile and well-respected conservatives, and that proved to be quite a useful strategy because they were talking the language that we wanted them to talk to the people in the right places. Subsequent to that, we held the conference in Melbourne, and the relationship with pre-IRA became stronger with Pat and the various conferences up to 1996, when, as Pat indicated, we formed IRA. Prior to that, the conferences were run, as Pat would well know, on the smell of an oily rag and next to no money. In fact, I suspect a couple of people's houses were at risk in a couple of conferences, but Pat and I got through that, and that's literal. I didn't ever tell my board that they'd put up 100,000 to run the conference and hopefully would get it back, and we did, but it was a little worrying at times. But that was sort of just, it rolled along because it just made so much sense. And gradually, I think the community generally came along with it, with the idea. Once IRA started, my role really was a back seat role. I was treasurer for the whole time I was there, which I think I was told earlier was 17 years, which is a long time for someone with no accountancy background whatsoever. And I proved that well and truly a number of times. But that was how IRA was in the early days. It was a community organisation run by a network of people with a common vision. And that's what the conferences were like too. Pat and I have often said they weren't really conferences, they were movements, particularly in the early days. And every year people would come to the conference to be re-energised, to get their booster shot. and that was really obvious. And many people said, "Oh, this is great. We get together to talk. We encourage ourselves. We get confidence in what we're doing, and then we go away for another year to get beaten up, come back and do it again." And that was a really important role for the conference. The 17 years that I was on the board, there were a number of chair people. Pat was always there. There were some interesting issues, which we won't go into along the way with any organisation, and for some reason I always seem to be cast in the role of the fixer. But all the time, everybody I was involved with, and there were a lot on the board, had this common cause. And you can have your disagreements and you can have your fights, and there were fights, but at the end of the day, it came down to people being there for a common purpose. And I think that's probably the success of IRA. No one was there for their own grandisement. Everyone was there for the cause. And even, when I left in 2013, which I think was long enough, there was still that energy there of new people coming through. And I think it was high time I got off the board, because boards need to turn over. So I don't know whether that's useful, Kat, but mesh that with Pat, and you've got a bit of a potted history.
That's amazing. Thank you, Bill. I feel like we're kind of well and truly in touch with how it all happened at the beginning now. We've been given all that information from the both of you that really sets the scene. And just an amazing journey of the organisation and amazing people. And I agree with what you say about, it feeling like a movement. I think we'll come back to that later. The importance of the conference as being the kind of moment to bring people together, to galvanise and re-energise. Thank you for all your reflections, and we'll come back to you in a bit. So moving on to present day HRI, I'm really happy to introduce our next speaker, who's the current chair of the board, Lucy Burns. And Lucy joined our board in January of 2019 and became chair at the beginning of 2021. Lucy is a strategy and communications advisor to charities, government departments and public sector bodies. She advises on many issues, including drug and alcohol treatment, housing, homelessness and mental health. And Lucy's got extensive experience of providing advice to partners operating in the glare of media, regulatory and public scrutiny, and in politically sensitive environments. So perfectly suited to our work. And as a staff member, I have to say, I think it's great that we've got your expertise on the board to guide us on what's worked in other sectors, and really to kind of help us strategize about how best to communicate with the world outside our small supportive sector to those that need convincing about what we do. Thanks for joining us, and I'd be really grateful if you could reflect a bit on what drew you to HRI, and how you came to be on our board.
Thank you so much, Kat. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's so exciting to be joining and be a part of Constellations. I've been following it all week, and it's just been such a brilliant event. So thanks for having me today. In terms of how I became involved with HRI, I think there are probably two answers. First of all, I suppose I got involved through what I would call a sort of professional route, in that people in my networks said, oh, there's an organisation called HRI, they're brilliant, they're looking for a trustee to join the board who has got some experience and background in communications. And that's the sort of technical dry answer to how I first came across HRI. But the real story is that then I came along to meet Naomi and to meet Pat. And I had an experience which I've just had again this afternoon, listening to Pat talk about the start of the organisation. And he said some similar things to me that he's just said to all of us. And I was absolutely blown away and so inspired by the story, if you like, the origin story of HRI. And it made me realise, it struck me, we were in a little room in London in the office, and it was a bit of an epiphany for me, because I turned up thinking I need to get my CV out and talk about all the formal things that I've done in my career so far. And I realized that although I did want to bring my skills if I could help, that what Pat was talking about had also been, I know the title of this session is In My Life, but I thought, actually, this is much more than a professional interview to be on a board of trustees. And it took me right back to growing up in the Northwest, not that far actually from where Pat was based in Liverpool. I grew up in Manchester. And it really suddenly reminded me of something that I hadn't thought about for probably 20 years, growing up in the mid-80s, early 90s in the Northwest, and knowing all the friends, school friends, acquaintances, people my parents knew, who became involved in drugs in different ways for different reasons. There was at that period, as Pat was saying, a massive moral panic in the papers and the TV about the availability of drugs at that time in England. And of course, it made me think, listening to Pat, actually, there was a total disconnect between that moral panic and all the people I knew and grew up with, all of whom have gone on to do different things and taken different routes. And I really thought, oh gosh, I can actually join an organisation as a trustee, which can make sense of some things that have happened in my life and to people I've known. And I also thought, what a fantastic experience, a sort of learning experience for me it would be to be part of this organisation that has really started with this commitment, as Pat said, to helping save people's lives. And I can have a small part in that and learn a lot as a result. So that's a slightly long-winded way of saying how I was inspired really to join the Board of Trustees. And I've really enjoyed working with my fellow trustees and with Naomi and all the team ever since I've been on board.
Thanks, Lucy. We're really, really happy to have you. And yeah, I'm glad that you've been taken back to that first meeting with Naomi and Pat by this afternoon session. Yeah, really inspiring. I think we'll turn to Say, and then we'll bring everyone back for a discussion after that. So our newest board member, no, not quite newest, but one of the newest board members, sorry, Say. We're really fortunate to have you with us today. Say Kahindi joined HRI's board this year and brings with him a wealth of experience as the co-director and advocacy manager at Youth Rise Nigeria, where for almost a decade he has run development programs on human rights, drug policy, harm reduction, youth development and sexual and reproductive health. He's a member of the National Technical Working Group on Drug Demand and Harm Reduction in Nigeria. And he's an international working group member of Youth Rise and a fellow of the Young African Leaders Initiative. So welcome, Say. Thanks for joining us on this panel today. And on the board as well. Yeah, really grateful to have you there.
Thank you.
Please, can you tell us a little bit about your kind of journey towards becoming a board member at HRI?
Right, thank you very much, Kat. It's a pleasure to be part of the conversation this afternoon. Well, I sort of feel like the new kid on the block. You know, I mean, listening to, to like the story of how, HRI started and all. The first thing I'd like to say is me being a part of the board at HRI is a gift, and it's one I don't take for granted at all. I remember meeting Naomi in 2019 or 2018 or 2019, in the UK, and I listened to her speak so passionately, about harm reduction, and the great work, that the organization was doing. After then, we kept on meeting, at different conferences, like the CND and all. And when I when she reached out to me, about the opportunity, to come on the board, the first thing I did was to, go on the site, and actually check the strategic plan of the organization. That's from 2018, 2020, and of course, which has been extended now. And, that gave me a sense of the direction of the organization, and that made the decision very easy for me. It was a no-brainer, that I needed to be part of the excellent work, being done by by the organization. It also came at a time when I was working on a report on the challenges faced by young people who use drugs, in accessing healthcare, looking at the COVID-19, and it was so difficult, getting a lot of information, about young people who use drugs. It was so difficult getting a lot of data, and for me, I saw it as an opportunity to bring my expertise, my experience, and also ensure that the organization, of course, expands its work, towards like young people who use drugs, harm reduction itself. And for me, it's been an interesting experience. It's been an exciting experience. Looking at the diversity, on the board. It's been a learning experience for me. This is my first board experience, and I must confess that initially, when I actually read the history, it was quite intimidating. Looking at the history. 1990. I was definitely a baby then, and I've been part of the amazing work done by the organization. It's so for me. And looking at how I actually came to should I say do like some work in the harm reduction space. Before being a drug policy reform advocate full scale, I had worked with young people. Adolescents and young people living with HIV. And I realized that a bulk of them were sharing needles. And looking at the hostile policy environment in Nigeria, I just wasn't comfortable, with the general narrative around abstinence, because the fact remains that yes, people use drugs. Young people experience use drugs, and we need to face their reality, and also, seeing how, friends and other people around me, were using drugs, and I actually noticed like a major disparity. Those that were well off, were treated with, say, baby gloves. It was more. Their folks, the parents were more, you know, understanding. While they were, not so well off, while those that were not so opportune, most were mostly arrested, mostly just led to, to ruin. Some even died as well. And for me, I kept on thinking how unjust and unfair that was and everything. And for me, it's and I mean it's and at the core of public health, at the core of harm reduction is actually saving lives. It's about protecting people, and for me, I can say that really drew me, into the harm reduction space.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Say. That's really great to hear your reflections and yeah, kind of I can relate to the intimidation, I must admit, that you felt joining the board when I first joined the organisation, especially since, I'd read lots of things written by people on the board, and yeah, I can remember kind of turning up on my second week in the job, at the Warsaw conference, which was a baptism of fire really into the new job, and just sitting down in the lobby, not knowing who I was sitting next to, and actually Pat was there with Maddie, and he struck up the conversation and made me feel welcome straight away. And yeah, I think that sort of set the tone for me in that job. I think you probably felt that way having joined the board as well, just the kind of friendly warmth, and as other people have said today, that kind of feeling that we're all in it together, and we're all ultimately believing in harm reduction and saving lives, and yeah. So I would like to bring back our other panelists now, and invite people who are listening to ask any questions they might have. You can put them in the chat, and I'm just skimming through now and seeing Harm Reduction International staff from years gone by. Hi Rick, hi Claudia, and lots of nice comments and memories, I think, being put in about conferences and meeting up with people. And Pat, a shout out to you for being a fantastic musician as well, is in there as so that's nice. I think now that we've kind of heard from everybody, I've got a couple of questions. If as people maybe put something in the chat as well, I'll kind of kick off with a question to Bill and Pat really about, you know, when you look at how HRI has grown over the past 25 years, could you tell us anything that's kind of surprising to you about the organisation and the contribution to the sector, or anything, that you want to reflect on about how the organisation's grown and the movement's grown?
Can I answer this?
Yeah, of course you can.
Bill, I just wanted to tell you about Bill, actually. When I met Bill, and I did meet Bill on the phone, and Bill called me in my office and said, "Good day, Pat. Bill Stronach here." Now, I didn't know who's Bill Stronach. I'd never heard of him in my life. This guy, he said, "I'm calling from Melbourne." I said, "Jesus Christ." His next words were almost exactly, it's imprinted on my brain, "I believe you're holding a conference in Canberra." I said, "Yeah." He said, "No, you're not. We're going to hold it in Melbourne." That was exactly what he said. And I thought, whoa, who is this guy? Because I'd actually almost signed off the conference to be in Canberra. So Bill said, "You better come and see me." So he actually paid for me to go to Melbourne. And of course, you know, when Bill tells you to do something or suggests you do something, you do it, actually. Because he's always right, actually. So we did the conference in Melbourne, but it's all his fault.
Can I just make a comment, Kat?
Yeah.
Looking at the lifespan of IRA HRI, I think a real turning point was when Jerry Stimson got hold of quite a big grant, and I think you might have mentioned it, and I'm not quite sure what it was for, but my memory, and Pat may correct me, my memory was that was the real first money that had ever been put into the organisation, and that gave us a real lift, a capacity to go forward and gradually employ people, because up to then there was Jerry and a part-time assistant who was actually my executive assistant at the Australian Drug Foundation, so they were really paying her. The board didn't know it, but that seemed to me to be a real turning point when, rather than being just a folksy little organisation driven by Pat, essentially, it really got legs and had a chance to grow, and it did.
But what Bill's saying is absolutely true. We had. I actually used to phone Ethan. I used to say, "Ethan, can you give me some money?" And he'd send me 25,000 in the bank and things like that. And that's how I remember I got invited. The head of the Drug Policy Foundation at the time, Shay Horosco, I think her name was. She invited me over to the US. And we were having lunch, and she gave me a check for $50,000. I said, "There's another one coming." It was like, really, we had no money, basically. We had no money, honestly. It was, yeah. But I mean, I don't know, Fabio, you probably know Fabio Mesquita. He's one of my favorite people in the world. When we were doing the Brazil conference, the night before the conference, or the evening before the conference, it was in posh hotel in Sao Paulo. He said to me, "Pat," he said, "have you got $20,000? I said, "What?" He said, "We need $20,000. I said, "Fabio, I've got no." He said, "What's this for?" He said, "Well, the people in the hotel have told us," the hotel director said, "that unless you make a deposit of $20,000 this evening, we'll cancel the conference." So I actually had 2 credit cards with limits of £12,000 on each. So I said to Fabio, "Will I get this back, Fabio? If I put this on my credit cards, will I get this back?" He said, "Yeah, you'll get it back." So I went and I gave them my credit cards, and they took $20,000 between the 2 credit cards. And the conference happened, and then it was all okay. And then so I said to Fabio at the end, I said, Fabio, what about the money that I haven't got that I put in? He said, oh, don't worry about that. He said, we'll sort it out this afternoon. So in the afternoon, we went over to an office in Sao Paulo of a guy who was a friend of Fabio's. Fabio told him the story. This guy opened the drawer, took a checkbook out, and wrote a check for $20,000. That's how I got the money back. I mean, and they were the kind of things. They were the kind of things that happened. I mean, our house was mortgaged. What not mortgaged? What was collateral on the Barcelona conference? That's how I got money. And I actually thought we were going to lose the house. It got that close. It got that close. Yeah.
So I think that's exactly it, isn't it? The sort of DFID grant that Jerry and Jamie applied for and that we got turned it around.
They didn't even apply for it. They walked into it. Mike Borovitz called them up and said, listen, I've got £40,000 here. Can you give me some kind of a plan? So they gave him a plan, and Mike Borovitz gave them the £40,000. That was on the day after my last day. That's IRA as it was. Mind you, I'm not sure I would have known what to do with it.
Well, thankfully we figured that bit out. Well, they figured that bit out. We've got a question and a reflection from Claudia. She's Claudia Stoicescu, who worked with us for a while at HRI. She says, such a wonderful discussion and a walk down memory lane. Thank you to all the panelists. What are your thoughts on the next 25 years for harm reduction and HRI's continually evolving role? So I'd like to put that to Say and Lucy, if I could, whoever wants to go first.
I'm happy to go first briefly.
Okay.
That's okay. So.
Okay.
I'm just going to say something very quick
about
it, actually. And I guess, in a way, Constellations is a good example of how the organisation is evolving. I was thinking of Pat and Bill, particularly Pat talking about the first conference and the fact that that conference was a form of a way of achieving sort of collective advocacy and a way that people could get together and network. And at that time, a community that was just forming and working out that it had something really important to say. And I guess what you've seen in Constellations is the importance for HRI of keeping that principle alive, that HRI is here to facilitate different voices, different points of view, to expand understanding of harm reduction, but also to expand the concept of what harm reduction is. And I think HRI, under Pat at the beginning, it sounds to me as if it was always pushing the boundaries. And I think what I find brilliant about the current team and under Naomi is that, and Constellations is a good example of that, is that you're still pushing the boundaries to make that case. And I hope we'll continue to do that for the next 25 years.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Lucy. So did you want to add anything? We're really running up to the wire, so it's got to be brief.
Yes. I mean, for me, I like to see HRI as a torchbearer. HRI is not scared to have the difficult conversations. And the next 25 years, the question is not if, if countries, if people would accept harm reduction, it is when. So, harm reduction is going to happen. Yes, there'll be, people with the support for harm reduction will certainly grow. And, and I see harm reduction international, being at the forefront of that, the conversation and that engagement.
That's brilliant. I think that's a really lovely, optimistic, strong way to end. And I would just like to thank. Oh, go on, Pat, go on.
One sentence, two sentences. I've always embarrassed my daughters since they were little babies, and I'm going to embarrass them again.
Do it.
They are awesome. This has been awesome, and I'm so proud of them.
I'm proud of them too. We're very lucky.
Hear, hear, Pat.
Thanks very much to the wonderful panelists and to everyone that's joined us for the session today. Please join us for the closing, which is starting imminently on the other channel. Go for it. Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Bye. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.